Look, I'm delighted to welcome Anil Mohanlal, not just to the interview this afternoon, also to the Commercial Property Summit, and really delighted, looking forward to the event, which is not far away now, depending when you're listening to the video. Look, Anil is one of the few speakers I've had at my monthly events, and I've had monthly events for the last decade, or will be decade in April. And Anil's spoken on tax a number of times, but the other times I've asked Anil to speak on commercial and specifically retail. So look, we were going through the, what could Anil suggest and talk about in the video. I just want Anil, first of all, just to give a little potted history, because it could take the whole seminar to go through the whole history. So just a little history about when you got into commercial property. It was in the late 80s, Anil, wasn't it?
Yeah, very, very briefly, Brendan. Late 80s, early 90s, we were in residential, but for various reasons, we decided to move into commercials, which was slightly different as people wouldn't necessarily understand it today. But yeah, we started buying high street shops with big name occupiers. And that's how we got involved. We continued to buy throughout the decades, through till to fairly recently. I mean, we haven't bought very much over the last 5-10 years, but that's basically involvement in commercial, primarily high street shopping centres, very heavy traditionally heavy footfalls, A3 restaurants, and large sort of fashion stores.
So in terms of the geographical spread, Anil, from my knowledge, after hearing you speak a number of times, it's mostly outside of London, the southeast. If I remember correctly, it's mostly towards the north. Is that right?
Yeah, we've got Bridlington, Barrow, and then sort of outskirts of London, Twickenham, quite a few in Harrow, and one or two in the northwest of London.
Look, it was fascinating what you said before, because one thing I'm a big fan of is research, and listening to yourself about how you research retail. And you were explaining there's a slight difference, or maybe more than a slight difference, between retail with tenants inside and without tenants as well. So do you want to just explain that a little bit more in terms of your research process?
Yeah. Often when you're looking for high street investments, you come across perhaps vacant premises, or premises which already have tenants in it on a long lease, commercial lease, often described as FRI, which is fully repairing and maturing leases. And the values can be quite dramatically different, whether it's vacant or whether it's let. So the criteria that you need to do are very different, depending on what your use is going to be. If it's on a lease, then you're really valuing it on your return, on the quality of your tenant, which is really quite important. So you put those factors into your equation. Whereas if it was vacant, then it's a different set of calculations, because it's what are you going to do with it? Are you going to get a tenant in? What's the market value of that rent? Are you going to get potentially a premium? Unlikely these days, but you could well do. So it's really, you got to look at it differently. The same building will have a different valuation based on whether it's let or not let. And what is often really important for investors, probably at this seminar, is the upper parts. Often the lease will include the upper parts, whereas if it's vacant, one really has the choice of letting the lower parts and doing something else with the upper parts. And that's where the value could be obtained.
Anil, we were going through before doing the video about industrial and your view of industrial. And the difference between industrial and retail in terms of returns. So look, it may not be obvious. I know it's obvious to you, but you've been in the commercial industry now for the last 30 plus years. So in terms of how you see industrial being different to retail and returns, do you want to just explain that?
Um, yeah, I mean, this is my take on it. I think the interest in industrials is increased certainly over the last few years. Whereas, because it's the people sometimes in retail or existing retail investors are branching out into the industrial area, mainly the warehousing. There does seem to be a market demand for such premises, and it's borne out by research. And often you just need to drive past these industrial estates, whereas we used to see to let boards and to for sale, you see a lot less of them. And there are lots of people looking for good industrial space in good locations. And the possibility of letting them on reasonable leases is very high, and you generally get a much higher yield as well.
So look, in terms of, I know you said you're looking at industrial. Is there a particular reason why you're potentially moving away from just retail? Is it, the obvious thing that retail shops are really struggling? Not all retail shops, obviously. I am doing this interview from Oxford Street, and Oxford Street is still very vibrant. Well, I'm literally 50 yards or 30 yards from Oxford Street, which is a very vibrant street, particularly in terms of where the likes of John Lewis, Debenhams and Marks & Spencer's, although to be fair, both John Lewis but they've all been in the news, at some point or another. And Oxford Street's changed significantly as well.
Yes.
Yeah. So, but in terms of why you'll be prepared to look at industrial, and the other question is what I asked you before the interview. What would you do if you were new to commercial, had the funds? And I know this is a tricky question. It's not a trick question, but what would you do if you had the funds? Would you do it retail? Would you do industrial? What would you be looking at? And we're not giving advice here. It's just your.
No. Okay. Well, I mean, we're still in retail. We're going to be in retail. We're not necessarily moving away from it, but I guess we're just diversifying a little bit, and we're tidying up our portfolio because, like most things, we've got stuff which was great at the time. Times have changed, so we need to either get rid of it or do something else with it. Industrials, what would I advise for people to do? I don't think there's an answer to that. Again, this is my personal view. I feel the retail still is exciting because over the last 30 years, I've seen this, and most people
even in retail, you've seen that, Anil. It's not
absolutely.
just
Absolutely. The high street has not been one sort of upward trend throughout. We've had times when rents were falling, but we've had times when we've had empty premises because of demand, and those same premises years later would be in tremendous demand. So I think there's great opportunity on the high street, to be honest. The old adage of when everyone's selling, you buy. There's a lot of truth in that. I still believe that because there is going to be a lot of gems on the high street where those premises are going to be worth a lot of money because the high street is changing. It's going to be adapting. There's going to be a different demand for it. And if you catch that correctly in the right place, you'll do very, very well out of it. So we're not moving out of it by any means. As you say, it's very difficult for me to say what would necessarily one would do. I think you've got to look at everything. You've got to look at the options and say, what do I want? Am I slightly more risk averse? If you are, and you want a steady stream of income, I think the industrials offer that better. My personal view is you may not get the capital gain there, simply because the way the structure of the building and the locations are often in secondary and tertiary areas, whereas the high street always tends to be sort of centre or in fairly demanding areas. So I think you've got to look at both and do your research, speak to people who've done it before. And we talked earlier about data, publicly available data, which often one can buy. Personally, I've not used that to any great degree because it's too general to apply to individual situations. You just got to do your own intense homework.
Just one final question, Anil. So you see retail's changing. Can you just elaborate on that a little bit more? Where do you see it going? Maybe not even in 5 years, but in the next 12, 24 months.
Okay. We've recently relet some of our shops, and the demand is in A3. And we've heard all about the restaurants and the big chains in trouble, but we found that the independents do quite well. The very niche food shops, the coffee shops, and so on. And that's where the demand is. So we've got quite a few A3s, and they seem to be doing pretty well. I think the traditional retail shops there's going to be less demand for it. And where I see the bigger stores, for example, the ones that we have got up north, where it's 4,000 or 5,000 square feet, the demand from those multinationals is going to fall, I believe. But we're actually now looking into subdividing that larger store into very many smaller ones, and anything from between 6 to 10 different units, where you get different businesses into them under shared services. And I think there's going to be a lot of that happening. Affordable, smaller spaces.
Anil, I just want to say a massive thanks, not just for today, but also for Saturday, the 7th of March. People keep asking me, is it really a Saturday? It is.
I don't start work till 10, you know that.
Yeah. So I look forward to seeing you on Saturday, the 7th of March. Look, it's going to be an amazing event. I've got people flying in all the way from Ireland. Gavin Gallagher, 9,000 employees on an office park. Very lucky to have met him. I went over to Dublin just to see the office park with some very big clients, Google, one of them. So, I really look forward to the event. And it's for the listeners out there, it's my last one-day event of the year. I don't have another one in March or in April, June, July. It's my last one-day event until 2021. So I've got my monthly events, but in terms of one-day events, it takes a lot of work to get the likes of Anil to agree and other speakers as well. So I just want to say massive thanks for taking time out today, Anil. How can people reach you? Is there a best way? LinkedIn? Would LinkedIn be a good way?
To be honest, I'm not that active on LinkedIn. Either through
coming along to the 7th of March,
postings on the seminar, or on our by email at Anil@Kumar, that's kumar.co.uk.
Right, so I just want to say a massive thanks for taking time out this afternoon. Thank you.
Cheers, Brendan. See you soon. Cheers.
Bye-bye.